Moving on, and the US Congress has voted to override President Obama's veto of the bill that would allow Americans to potentially sue Saudi Arabia for the attacks of 9/11. RT's Caleb Morpin has been following the story.
Well, the U.S. House of Representatives was right behind the U.S. Senate in voting to overturn Barack Obama's veto. At the moment, despite Barack Obama's objections, it appears that the JASTA bill will be signed into law. Now, this is a law that essentially allows the victims of 9/11 to sue the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for their involvement in the attacks. U.S. President Barack Obama said he opposed the bill and that it was against the interests of the United States, that it opened up a dangerous precedent in international relations by allowing the United States to be sued. If the U.S. can sue Saudi Arabia, the logic was then Saudi Arabia and other countries could potentially sue the United States. The lawsuits would be based on the 28 pages of the 9/11 Commission report that were previously classified. It took 15 years for the 28 pages of the 9/11 Commission report that talked about Saudi connections with the hijackers to be released. Well, now that those pages have been released, we have seen connections between the 9/11 hijackers and the Saudi government. And based on that, there are a number of 9/11 family members who would like to sue the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has threatened the United States with economic consequences as a result of the bill. They've threatened to withdraw over $750 billion in assets from U.S. banks as consequence for this bill. So we're yet to see what happens next.
Let's bring in a guest now, Stephen Zunes, who is a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco. Welcome. It's, the first time, amazing, in Obama's 8-year presidency when he's had one of his vetoes overturned. Is this embarrassing for him?
Certainly, but it was very hard to stop. Basically, it certainly has populist appeal, especially during an election year. Here we have this autocratic, hardline Islamist government that, however indirectly, supported individuals, which ended up later taking part in the most horrendous terrorist attack in history. And it would be very hard for any member of Congress really to vote against it.
It seems like this, perhaps for the first time, we're seeing some kind of legal responsibility for 9/11 being attributed. Does this mean we're actually going to see US citizens suing Saudi Arabia?
Almost certainly, though it's questionable how far it will go, both because, again, there's no evidence the Saudi government itself was behind the attacks. The most evidence they had was that a cultural attaché in the Los Angeles, and Saudi consulate in Los Angeles did fund this group of people who were part of the conspiracy. So that's a bit indirect, but what's really striking about it is it's currently it's not legal for any American to sue any government for any cause. And so it's a precedent here that I think concerns the Obama administration and a lot of chief diplomats, even those who have no particular sympathy with the Saudis.
Saudi Arabia, not for the first time. We saw this with the UN as well when they talked about human rights breaches. The Saudis have warned of economic repercussions for the United States if this happens. Do you think they will actually carry through with those threats?
Perhaps. There are a lot of economic connections with the Saudis. Oil is less important than it used to be as the United States is diversifying its energy sources and prices are low. But there are hundreds of billions of dollars of contracts by American construction firms and others. There is this huge arms sale announced that, despite its controversy, Obama and a bipartisan majority pushed through. Again, not out of love of the Saudis, but more for support for American arms manufacturers. And again, if they pull out this money, it's not going to cause an economic collapse, but it's going to definitely be a hit, and it will depress markets at least briefly. So it is something to think about, and this is one factor that obviously led to the disagreements by the administration. But to be honest, I think the main reason we're concerned is that if American citizens can sue Saudi Arabia because of their ties to the 9/11 hijackers, think of all the people who could sue the United States. For example, Nicaragua, survivors of the Contras, which is a U.S.-backed terrorist group that U.S. armed and trained and essentially created. You know, think of those who've been victims of U.S.-backed military coups or other acts of violence. Those who've been killed by bombs and planes sent by the United States, despite the fact that the recipient nations were known to engage in these kinds of attacks on civilians. If Americans can sue Saudi Arabia, one can only imagine various people around the world who'd like to sue the United States.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Has Pandora's box been opened? Many thanks for speaking to us here on RT. Stephen Zunes is our guest, a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you.